Hey, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes while everybody gets logged on. So feel free to chill out and we'll get started in just a second. Hey, Michelle. All right. We have a few people logged on so far. So as we kind of get a few more people going, then we'll get started. Hey, everybody. It looks like everybody's kind of logging on, taking a few minutes. I know it's just past noon Eastern Standard Time, so we'll wait just probably 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. All right. All right, everybody. Well, welcome to part 5 of our 3rd annual Meaningful Change series. My name is Casey Craig, and I'm the Executive Director for the Cute Syndrome Foundation and Stella's mom. Today, we have 2 remarkable physical therapists here to chat with us, which I will introduce momentarily. Traditionally, when we think about physical therapy, we immediately think of our children and their therapy needs. But today we're going to look through a different lens, and we're going to look at this from a caregiver self-preservation perspective. Oftentimes we push our bodies to the limits, day in and day out, and this can lead to pain and injuries. So today, I'd like to thank our lead sponsors, Neurochem Biosciences and Praxis Precision Medicines, for providing us this opportunity to expand our knowledge on how we can approach our daily activities in a healthier way. So we have a lot to go over today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So here in just a second, I'm going to bring up the presentation. And we will meet these lovely ladies here, which you already know one, but we will get the other one on board here too. Okay. Are you able to see my screen here? All right. Are you guys, you're able to see it? Awesome. Okay. So today we have 2 amazing physical therapists. The first one here is Sarah Jones. So Sarah is actually Stella's physical therapist and has been for, I was trying to figure out, has it been probably about 4 years?
Maybe? I think so. I was trying to figure out the math too, and I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. We started out with swim therapy with Sarah, and then we kind of morphed into swim and land and all the things in between. So Sarah has been a huge resource for us and just a rock star. So I'm so happy to have you on today. Do you want to talk a little bit about your journey as a physical therapist?
Well, yeah, sure. So I have been practicing for 23 years now, which doesn't seem possible, but yeah, it's been quite a while. All of it has been in pediatrics, specializing in aquatics. That's kind of been my love of the water since I was in high school. And I've had the honor of continuing that as I've become a professional. And I've also I've worked in the Southwest Missouri area now for 12 years. I started out in Kansas City. I worked up there just after graduating from college in Kansas City. And I practiced up there with a wonderful therapist that specialized in aquatics for a number of years before moving down here. And I've worked across all of the different specialties in pediatrics. I've done outpatient, I've done private practice, I've done the school setting, I've done early intervention, and I've also treated kids from birth all the way up into adulthood. So a pretty wide range of kiddos that I've worked with. And I've been so honored and privileged to be able to work with Stella and her family for the last 4 years. I cannot tell you how much I've learned from them and just to be a part of this wonderful family has been great. So I truly love it. I treasure every time I get to see you guys.
Yes, it's been likewise, absolutely likewise. And Michelle, so Michelle Youngquist, we have her here today, and you know her as Henry's mom, but do you want to talk a little bit about your life before Henry and what your career is?
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated from PT school in 2014. So I've been a PT for the last 9 years. And I've practiced primarily in
Oh no.
adult outpatient therapy. Specifically, it's my
Yeah, we're kind of getting you in and out. Maybe if you want to take your video off.
being goofy.
Yeah, maybe take your video off and see if we
Okay,
can
I'll
hear
take my video off.
Okay. So we heard
Is
that,
it better?
I heard, yes, that you've been a PT for 9 years. And that's the last I heard.
and that's fine. Yeah, I can go back to that. So I've been a PT for the past 9 years. I've practiced primarily in adult outpatient clinics, specifically with the orthopedic population. And then I'm Henry's mom. So I stepped back from working full time when Henry was born, because I'm sure as other parents on this call can relate, things get a little hectic when you have your first kid, and things get even more hectic when your first kid has special needs.
Exactly. Well, we're so excited to have both of you here and to touch on your expertise as we kind of go through our presentation today. So I want to start out as kind of bringing this back to our meaningful change theory theme, which is from surviving to thriving. And I know that I feel the daily pressure of trying to fit it all in, going to all the therapy appointments and going to all the doctor's appointments and doing all the things, the standard for 10 hours and doing this for X amount of hours. And it builds and it becomes this immense amount of pressure that we put on ourselves. And so I wanted to have an opportunity for Sarah to kind of give us her perspective on therapy and when this pressure starts to build and kind of how we can handle that.
Well, it's really easy to get caught up whenever you first learn that your child has got a lifelong disability. And as a therapist, and we're viewing it from our perspective, we definitely appreciate the time that you guys get with your family and being a family. And I mean, I speak just from my own personal family and life, but being a mom is the absolute number one priority in my life. And I love it. And it's the most wonderful gift that I could possibly have. And so as a therapist, I want to be that support system and allow you guys to have all of those wonderful experiences of being a parent and being a part of these little creatures' lives. And so it's easy to get caught up in the medical part and the therapy part and trying to provide the best and feeling the guilt. And it's okay to say, you know what, this being a family and having a child and just spending those times together are so much more important and valuable than the times in therapy. And it's okay to miss, and it's okay. We as therapists understand. We know that, you know, it's just a small part of the big picture. So don't ever feel guilty having to take a break or change things up or kind of transition through therapy. It's not a cut and dry, this is the way it has to be. You have to be in therapy, you know, forever. We're here to just provide that support and just that the needs that you need as a family at any point in time. So
I really appreciate that, because I think that sometimes we have to have someone else to give us that permission and to tell us it's okay. It's all right to take a break or to miss this particular therapy or whatever you need to do. And I include this picture of Stella and I on our back deck because I was having a week. This has been a couple months ago. We had one of our nurses get COVID, and then I forget what else happened. I was by myself. I was trying to do it all. I had a lot to do for work, and I just could feel myself about to explode. And I thought, you know what? I am going to take one thing off my plate this week, and we are canceling all therapy. We are not going anywhere. We are going to stay home, and I'm going to be mom today. And it was great to be able to have a few moments and to take that off my plate. Otherwise, I probably would have had some type of breakdown that week. So thanks for giving us permission, Sarah. All right. So yeah. So Sarah, do you want to kind of talk to us a little bit about maybe this proactive approach versus reactive approach when we're talking about taking care of ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. So as the primary caregiver for your child, it's important to remember that injury doesn't necessarily occur all at once, but it's over a period of time of poor mechanics, decreased flexibility, and weakness. And it's a buildup of improper repetitive lifting over time. So this begins from the moment you bring your child home all the way through adulthood. And I think that's really important. And it should be a part of every therapy session, is talking about the best way to not just handle your child in order for them to achieve developmental milestones, but how to care for your child and support them in ways that are supportive for your body as well. Like, what is your alignment? We're not just talking about your child's alignment, but what is the parent or the caregiver's alignment when they're lifting or helping your child sit, or any of those developmental skills that you're working on. And it continues and it evolves as the child grows and develops. So you definitely want to keep talking about it with your therapist periodically. And it's okay to ask your therapist, am I doing this right? Is there a better way to do it? And to make sure that your therapist understands that you're not just talking about the mechanics involved with your child, but what you as a caregiver look like when you're doing the lift and helping.
Yeah, because I think we are self-sacrificing in more than one ways. And unfortunately, our bodies is definitely one that gets hit really hard. And like we have here, if we don't take care of ourselves and we get injured, who's going to take care of our children, our loved ones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the first thing that we want to talk about is just the basic mechanics of the lift. So whenever you are beginning the lift, you want to think about where your feet and your knees and your hips are, and they should all be, your feet should be shoulder width apart, as well as your knees, and all kind of in a straight line. And you want most of your weight back on your heels. So you want to have a nice wide base of support. Okay.
Now, I will preface this here in just a second. You guys are going to see my rear end about a bajillion times today, because Sarah and I took tons of videos and pictures of me lifting Stella and all of our things. So I apologize now. You guys get a lovely view of me.
She was a wonderful model,
She was, I think, a little done with it towards the end, but whoops, I messed up here. Here we go. I'm going to go back. But yeah, no, she was a trooper.
So then after you get your feet apart, your knees apart, and you've got your alignment, then you want to bend, and you want to bend from your hips and your knees. You want to keep that weight back on your heels. And you want to keep your knees apart and back over your feet as much as possible. The other thing that you want to think about is you want to keep your child's weight as close to your center of mass and base of support as possible.
Okay. And so we have some lovely videos here. Do you want me to go ahead and start this first one, Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk about lifting as well, another consideration is the equipment too. So here Casey is lifting the wheelchair into the back of the van. And as you see, she doesn't have a ramp. So this is one way to do it, where you're using the wheels on the wheelchair to kind of get it back on the back of the car and using that momentum to kind of lift it up.
Yeah, and you're probably asking, do you have scratches on the back of your van? And I do. But for me, it's a lot easier to do that than to have to like break it down or try to lift it up.
Yeah. And if you think about it, these wheelchair, I mean, they're not light. They usually without your kid in there, they usually can range from anywhere from 20 to 30, even 50 pounds. So it's not, I mean, that's another lift that you're considering into your day too. So
Stella's is 56 pounds because we have to usually put her on the scale with the wheelchair and then subtract it out. So yep, 56 pounds. All right, I'm going to start the next video, which is me taking the wheelchair out of the van.
and again, we always talk about the lift itself, but I think there's two components to the lift. There's the lifting up and then also taking or doing the reverse of the lift. So as you can see, Casey's just taking the wheelchair out the reverse direction, but you do the same sort of technique. You want to keep your shoulders over your hips and your knees, and you want to keep that nice wide base of support. And again, you want to bend at your hips and your knees and not at your back. It's really easy once you do the lift to forget the second part of the lift. So I think that's really important to consider as well.
When we were doing these videos, I remember being really aware of bending in the appropriate way to pick up Stella, to like squat down and pick her up. But as soon as I laid her down, I bent over. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I didn't even realize that's what I was doing at all until we had these videos and we were walking through it. So I definitely am more cognizant of that now.
Then the other piece of the lift is you want to make sure that you're holding your child firmly. And you want to be able to kind of cradle underneath their arms and shoulders. And if possible, you want to make sure that their arms are crossed over their body, not kind of flopped out to the side. And then you want to scoop underneath the knees and hips so that you're kind of getting that whole cradle hold for them. This can be a challenge as a child gets larger. And a lot of times, I have to almost, when I'm lifting Stella, I have to almost do kind of a partial lift up and then scoop my arm up underneath her hips. Otherwise she just kind of slides right out. If you've got one of those kids that's got a little bit lower tone than other ones. So sometimes you've really got to think about the position of your arms and how best to make sure that you're supporting underneath the child's base of support as well, which in Stella's case is right there at the low back and at her glutes. So
I also want to just take a moment to remind families, we know that not everybody's kid looks like Stella. So if you guys have any particular questions, or if there's something that you're like, man, I'm having a really hard time, getting my child to corral them to dress, or how do I do it if they're, have this particular challenge. So feel free to jump in and then chat, and we will absolutely look at those as we go through.
And then one of the important things that you always consider when you're doing the lift is you don't want to twist or you don't want to side bend. So you want to come straight up from a wide squat, which Casey does an excellent job doing. I myself personally, when I do a lift, especially from the floor or a lower surface, I have to come up in a half kneel position. And then once you're standing, that's when you want to pivot one foot out and then turn your whole body in the direction you're turning if you have to change directions. And when you think about when you're doing a transfer or lifting somebody up from the floor or a low position and you're doing in that half kneel position, again, it's almost two components of the lift where you're bringing the child up to your chest again, and then you're getting into that half kneel position. And then you want to then kind of come up nice and smoothly from that half kneel position if possible.
Yeah, and we're going to have a video here in just a second that will kind of even show how I did this with Stella, but put her on the couch and then repositioned myself and then picked her up from there, because it's hard for me to go from that half kneel to a complete stand. So. All right, so we have some videos here of me transferring Stella from her bed to her wheelchair and then back from her wheelchair to the bed. So I'll go ahead and start this one.
And you can see Casey's getting Stella positioned for the transfer. She does the nice squat. And then we also talk about, and then you see that she bends at her knees and squats down to lower Stella to the ground instead of just bending at her hips. Another thing to consider, if possible, is trying to raise the height of the transfer surface up to your waist or just above your waist. If possible, that will help decrease having to kind of bend or squat down at your legs as well. Sometimes that makes the transfer a little bit easier. Another thing to consider with your transfers is also think through your positioning. Is the wheelchair where you need it to be for the transfer? Are you going to be able to grab your child? Everybody has a particular side that they like to lift from. I think for me, whenever I lift Stella, I tend to hold her with her head on my left side, and my right arm is underneath her legs. And so you have to really think through, okay, when I lift her up, which direction am I turning? Is there anything in my way? Is it a straight transfer? Am I having to can I just lift her up and then shift her over, or do I have to turn to get her head in the correct position on the bed? So there's a lot of little bitty steps that you have to kind of think through and with the transfer as well, that they can help and prevent, a possible injury or fall, or inadvertently having to put yourself in a position where you've left with no choice but having to twist or put your body in a weird position.
Yeah, definitely. And then this one is me bringing her from her bed to her wheelchair. And it was a lot easier for me to pull her towards me, turn her towards me more. And I have the bed down pretty low. Her bed can go up higher. But I wanted to kind of give you a perspective if you have a bed that's not raisable. Okay. All right. So moving over to our next lifting mechanics.
So then you want to make sure, again, just breaking down the lift again, you want to really be conscious of your posture. You want to make sure that you're keeping your shoulders, your hips, and your knees all in line down through your feet. And you don't want to bend forward at your hips, putting the person's weight in front of your base of support. You want to try and keep that child, their weight as close to your base of support as possible. If you think about lifting, like, let's say, a full gallon jug of milk with your arms straight out in front versus having that jug of milk close to your chest, even that little bit of weight is going to make a big difference in the strain in your arms and in your back muscles. So
yeah, I know that Ken, my husband, he's 6'5". So Stella is usually much lower than what he would prefer. But I remember he was not lifting her up. It was when he was putting her back down, and he bent over without squatting. And that's when he threw his back out. And so he has definitely tried to be more aware of how he's putting her back into her chairs. All right, so the next one is something that I haven't done actually in a really long time, mainly because Stella is getting so big. So I don't think I did bathtub transfers after Stella was probably about 35 pounds, is probably 35 pounds, because it got very, very difficult. And I felt like it was unsafe for me to do that. And so we luckily had our bathroom modified to where we have a roll-in shower, but we know that that is not something that everyone is able to get. We were able to get ours through a Medicaid waiver. So we wanted to show the proper way to transfer into the bathtub. And I will warn you, my bathtub is extremely deep. So it is a pretty deep lunge here. And then Sarah, as you kind of go through this, if you want to kind of give some tips on what the safest way for someone to get someone out of the bathtub, I think that would be awesome too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that you really want to consider is when you're transferring in and out of the tub, you don't want any water in the tub. And then you want to make sure that your child is dry, just to decrease the risk of wet surfaces and slippery surfaces. That's probably one of the easiest things that you can do when you're doing this transfer. I also really encourage families, if at all possible, once your child reaches, and it varies depending on how much a child can help with the transfer, but once a child reaches about 40 pounds, it's usually better to consider doing a 2-person transfer or looking at some sort of shower chair, or a lift, if possible, a lift chair out of the tub. And I know it's not always possible to do that, but again, the bathtub transfer is probably one of the hardest transfers to do with a child. And so if you can at all, try and make it a little bit easier with some sort of piece of equipment. That's what I encourage. And again, as you can see, Casey, whenever she brought Stella up out of the bathtub, she brought her up towards her chest and kind of got her on the edge of the tub so that she had that support until she could get her weight shifted back onto her heels, and then she came back up. So she made it look really easy and a really smooth motion. But at the same time, she was very cognizant of trying to use at least use the lip of the tub as kind of a secondary lift support surface so that she could get her weight back on her heels and back up.
Well, I just remember you mentioned this just a second ago, but to hit on this again, when you were like, well, when you transferred Stella, did you dry her off first? I'm like, nope. It didn't even occur to me. I know how silly that sounds, but it really did not even occur to me. I was like, no, I just lifted her up and grabbed her and ran. And so, yeah, I think that's such an easy thing that sometimes we forget as caregivers, but yeah, drying her off would be a lot easier than trying to pick up a, slippery, little girl. So, all right, let's move on to another lifting mechanic.
All right. So then a huge part of doing a correct lift is really thinking about your core. So when we talk about your core, it's not just your abdominals, but it's also your glutes as well. And you want to think about whenever, just before you're doing the lift, and during the lift, you want to try and stabilize your core muscles, try and tighten those abs, try and tighten those glutes. And then in order to stabilize your body. And then one thing to really remember is as you're doing the lift, right before you start the lift, you want to take a deep breath in. And then as you complete the lift, you want to breathe out. You don't want to hold your breath when you're doing any sort of lift, because that puts extra pressure on you can get a vagal response and resulting in getting lightheaded and possibly fainting. So as well as getting an increase in your heart rate. So you want to remember to breathe as you're doing the lift, both as you're coming up and then again as you're lowering down. That's when you want to breathe out. You don't want to hold your breath.
Sarah, I have a question on the chat. This particular mom said, my main obstacle is that my son is 5'8" and I'm 5 foot tall. So what would be the best way to move my son when he is very limp and heavy soon after a seizure? Is there a particular time that is best to move him, like waiting for him to gain some consciousness and some strength before moving him?
And I guess if you're talking about just after the seizure, I mean, obviously you want to make sure that the seizure is done and complete. And then your child is in kind of if they're on the floor in that side lying position, or if they're on a particular chair or surface, kind of in that side lying recovery position. And then I would recommend that as long as they're stable, waiting until they're starting to come back to consciousness before trying to move them. Because if they're, especially if your child's that much bigger than you are, that's going to be a really hard kind of lift or transfer to do. So you want to try and make sure that they're conscious and able to help as much as possible with the transfer. Yes. Now I will say, if there is some sort of medical emergency and you've got to administer care to your child, then obviously the best position is for them to be down on a flat level surface so that you can then care for them properly.
Yeah. So this particular set of videos is a floor transfer, which is another thing I try not to do very often. And you'll see why here in a sec, but so I'll start this first video.
So again, you want to make sure that the wheelchair is locked, and you want to think about where you're transferring to and make sure that your surface is clear. And you can see Casey did a deep squat down to a lunge position to get Stella down to the floor.
Okay, and then here's me picking her back up.
And you see she brought Stella closer to her base, brought her up, and then came up from a deep squat. I personally, for me, doing that transfer, whenever bringing Stella up off the ground, I would have been in a more half kneel position and gotten her kind of on my lead knee that was coming up. And then once I had her position there, then I would have come up from a half lunge position rather than a full squat.
Yeah, it's so funny how we each have our own way of doing it. I even had to think about it for a second. I'm like, how do I do this again? All right. And so here's a video of me using the couch instead of just directly from the floor.
And this is kind of breaking that transfer into two smaller, more manageable transfers if you have to do a floor transfer. And I'll be honest, most of the time if I do this transfer with Stella, if I can, I'll end up moving her up to a couch and then bringing her all the way up. Just because she's getting just so long, it's really hard to get her cradled really well from the floor. And so I found for me, it's almost easier to break that transfer into two little transfers. That way I can make sure that she's safe and that I've got her positioned correctly. But then it also is a way for me to kind of check my body position as well, and giving me a moment to kind of get her up, reposition her, then take another breath, breathe out, and then stand up.
Yeah. We have just kind of a follow-up question to the same mom that asked about the larger son. So she said on that same note, how do I get him safely laying if he's seating or if he's like in a seated position? Do I use under his arm? So I'm wondering if she's like, is it okay for her to kind of grab him underneath his arms to kind of help him from a seated to a laying position? I think.
Oh, yes. So yes, if he's seated in a chair, yes, you would come up underneath the shoulders. You'd be back behind him so that you could kind of pull him into, I guess it's almost like a fireman's drag is what you're doing, but you're pulling him up to you, and then you would just kind of slide him off the chair and then just down to the floor, as carefully as you can. And I know in that moment there's a lot going on, and so just as long as you remember that you're trying to keep as much of his core weight or his trunk weight close to your base of support to bring him down to the ground. And then once he's down to the ground, then you can kind of straighten his legs out if you need to straighten his legs out, or position his head. And then obviously you want to turn him over onto his side so that he's in that recovery position.
Good. So here we kind of talk a little bit, we mentioned it a couple of times, but how important it is to do all those things when you're lowering the person back down into their chair or bed.
Yes. So just as you're preparing to lift them up out of the chair, whenever you have them and you're putting them back down in the chair, you want to think about tightening your core. So tightening your abdominals, tightening your glutes, making sure you've got a nice wide base of support. And then as you lower your child down into the support surface that you're lowering them into, you want to breathe out as you bend at your hips and your knees to get them down into the chair.
Perfect. So this next one is showing me transferring Stella from chair to another chair. So this is her wheelchair into her pea pod chair.
And I do want to say, when we're doing these videos, we talked through where we needed to position the chair, how where we needed to position the pea pod, and then we are honestly Casey went through the transfer. Okay, this is what it looks like when I'm not holding Stella. And we did the transfer before we did it. So if you can, if you're able to do something like that, I highly encourage you to go through the transfer either mentally in your head or just a pretend transfer before you do it, especially if it's one that you don't do all the time, just to make sure that you've got everything in place that you need to before you actually complete the transfer.
Yeah, and I did want to mention on this particular video, we have like a little ottoman that I was able to pick her up with sitting on the ottoman and then raise up. And so I find that sometimes that's a little bit easier. And I think that's how you said you get Stella out.
It is. And when you watch Casey lift Stella out of the pea pod chair, whenever she brings her up whenever Casey shifts back onto the ottoman, so you see she's got her arms underneath her knees, then she brings Stella onto her knee. She moves her hand that's under Stella's knee so that it's actually up underneath her glutes, and it gives her a little bit better stability and a hold on Stella in order to transfer her.
Yeah, we love that pea pod, but it is so deep.
Yes.
And so that is a little bit tricky to get in and out of sometimes. Now I got my dog snoring in the background. You guys are you're going to get really personal with me. You're going to see my house, my booty a bajillion times, and my snoring dog. All right. So here's a couple of things that I think you mentioned that we'd want to avoid when we're moving.
Yes. So you want to make sure whenever you're doing the lift, both directions, you want to avoid twisting, holding your child away from your body. You want to make sure that you're holding them up close to your chest as possible. And you want to avoid bending at your hips. And when I say bending at your hips, I mean keeping your knees straight and your back straight, and like just bending straight forward at your hips.
Yeah. Which I think is probably one of the easiest things to find yourself doing. All right, so this next one is going to show a car seat transfer. So how I'm bringing Stella from her wheelchair into a forward-facing car seat, which we'll have a picture here in a second, or a video of, we have an adaptive car seat that comes out of the van, which is really nice. So I sympathize for those of you that don't have one of those, because I was like, holy cow, this is really difficult. I did hit her head at least once.
Yeah, on it.
Yes. We were practicing. I was like, oh no, sorry, Stella.
Yeah. And so you see when Casey does that lift, and she brings her around, once she gets her lined up with the car seat, Casey actually brings her leg up onto the first step of the van and moves Stella onto her knee. And then she shifts forward into the car with her. And it's a very difficult transfer to do. And it's going to be, so the other thing too is, this is a van transfer. So this is going to be a taller surface than, like, let's say a car too. And so I would encourage you, because there's so much variability within cars as far as height, door openings, and all of that stuff, to talk to your therapist about how they would best recommend doing a car transfer if that's something that you're struggling with, because it is, there are some little tweaks and stuff that you have to consider with transfers, and it depends on the model of the car as well.
Yeah. And I would venture to say that the majority of therapists would be more than happy to just take 5 minutes to go out to the van with you or car and say, hey, can you watch me do this? Just so they can kind of give you some tips.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just talking about just lifting and transferring, for families, it's something that you're going to be doing throughout the lifespan. So just because you feel like you might be able to transfer your child as an infant doesn't mean that you'll be able to transfer them the same way as they become a toddler or a young child or a young adult. So it's definitely, lifting and transfers is something that you definitely want to keep revisiting as your child grows and gets bigger, or as you change different wheelchairs or adaptive chairs that you're using at home. It's a good idea to talk to your therapist about the transfer and what it looks like, and just making sure that you're doing it correctly, both for your child and for you as the caregiver. And it's not just about lifting the weight, but you also want to consider the length of your child, especially their arms and legs, and make sure that you've got those tucked in. It's real easy to kind of sometimes not get those arms in, and you can get them caught on a door surface or even a wheelchair. So always be cognizant of where the arms and legs are. And then I recommend once your child reaches 50 pounds, I really recommend considering getting some sort of mechanical lift or a 2-person lift, because it does become very difficult to lift when a child is more than 50 pounds. And then I also recommend looking at, and I am always thinking this through in my therapy sessions with all of my kids too, even when they're an infant, and as they get bigger, how much are they able to help with the transfer? And if they're able to help as well, how can I maximize a child's ability to help and assist with the transfer? Even if they're able to hold their head or their trunk, that's going to make a huge difference with the transfer as well. And it's important to make sure that that's incorporated into the therapy session.
I think it's just funny. I think Stella does everything in her power to not assist me. As soon as I pick her up, that's usually when she does a great big stretch and thinks that that's just the best thing ever. So I'm like, come on, Stella.
Yeah. And she has a great way of kind of flopping one arm out just when you think you have it. Yeah. Yeah.
So we wanted to hit a little bit on the equipment. And so we can work smarter, not harder, right? And so we have some pictures on here, but I actually do have some links. So if you guys are interested in like, hey, where did you find this equipment? I'd be more than happy to share those links in our support group or in an email to everybody. But Sarah, do you just kind of want to hit on these 3 things that we have here?
Yeah. So these are just kind of your 3 different types of, well, 2 of them are Hoyer lifts that are just, it just uses a sling seat that you put around your child to lift them up. And then the idea is that you're able to lift them out of any surface, and then you can transport them with using the wheels of the lift to get them to where you need them to be. They're helpful. They're also big, bulky, and cumbersome. So just as there are pros with these, there's also cons with these types of equipment. Again, it's another large piece of equipment that's in your home that you have to consider. Do you have the space for? Do you have the door? Are your doors wide enough to be able to maneuver them through them? So this is definitely an ongoing conversation that you want to have with your therapist. And I recommend that the earlier you start, the better, just so that you can plan for it, because it is a lifestyle. It is kind of a something that you have to consider in figuring out how best to incorporate it in, if possible, as your child gets bigger. The third one on the left is a sit to stand. So it's very similar to the Hoyer lift in that it has a sling that goes around the child, and then they actually face their knees in towards the padding that's there, the little black pads that are right there, and and then they can assist with the lift, so they can put weight through their legs and kind of help push up a little bit, and then that will help assist them up to a standing. And then it's essentially like doing a stand pivot transfer with them. Again, it's a big bulky piece of equipment, and it might not work for all individuals. So again, I encourage you to talk to your therapist about it, as well as an equipment vendor as well that can then give you lots of information on different pieces of equipment that are out there.
Yeah, we have a great DME provider that Sarah actually got us in contact with, and they come out to my house, and I'm like, okay, this is what I need. What do you got? And so we really looked at specifically where we can have certain things, because I don't know if we have the door width to be able to do some of the Hoyer lifts. And so we actually went with a ceiling lift track system. And I know a few people were concerned about the age of their home. I would really encourage you to have the DME company come in and look at that. I know our house is like, I think 27 years old, but they actually had to go up into our attic and put like a little bit of reinforcement up there, but we were still able to get this. And so I'll go ahead. It's kind of a longer video. And I know we're kind of getting short on time. I want to make sure Michelle has enough time to chat with you. But this has been really, really cool right now because Stella is so small. We don't use it a ton for just basic transfers, but we actually use it as a swing. So we get her all hooked up into the lift, and then we bring her up and then we let her swing on it whenever it's cold outside or rainy outside. Right. So you can kind of see, this is her nurse, Carolyn. She's absolutely amazing. And she's getting her all set up in the sling. And then Stella's doing her stretches.
Yep, and twisting, yes.
Twisting. And one thing that's really cool about the ceiling track systems is that once you have this setup in place, you can actually add track to it. So we're hoping in the next year or two, with the help of our Medicaid waiver, that we are actually able to get a track that goes all the way into the bathroom. So essentially, this is a mesh sling. So we could put her in that, take there's like a little post that comes out, take that, and we can take her all the way into the bathroom. And then I press that button and it will lower her down into the bathtub. That way she would have an opportunity to take a bath instead of a shower every so often, because we all know how girls like our baths. But you can see she's moving her along that ceiling track and it goes all the way around. So then that way I could put her in her wheelchair, or I could put her in her stander or swing.
And I think the thing that's nice about this is it's not, it's essentially, it's a Hoyer lift, but it doesn't have the big contraption that goes with a Hoyer lift. So it's definitely a space saving piece of equipment.
And I should mention, as soon as you get the motor is the most expensive, and then the track system is actually not that expensive. So once you get it up and running, then you could run those tracks in a lot of different places. All right, and so a couple of other equipment needs, especially with bathtub stuff, we have these two handy things. Sarah, did you want to kind of talk a little bit about these?
So the first one is, I believe it's a Rifton, and this one is either a shower chair, so you can roll it into the shower, or it can be positioned in the tub, and it is and you just set your child in there, and then you can slide them right across into the tub. Unfortunately, it doesn't lower down, so it would you wouldn't be able to submerge them down into the tub. It would be used just strictly as a shower chair. The second one is a automatic tub lift, so it does lower up and down, which is really nice. I'm not very familiar with them because insurance will not necessarily cover the cost of one of these. They see it as a unnecessary expense.
Well, and I'll put this in here, our little plug with the Connor James Smith patient assistant grant that TCSF has now. If this is something that insurance will not cover and you think is a game changer for your kid to be able to, or your loved one to be able to actually sit in the bathtub submerged, and this would help them get in and out, we can definitely talk about you guys filling out the grant for that. Okay, so I think I just wanted to hit on our adaptive chair that comes in and out of our van. This is again something else we got through our Medicaid waiver. We had to stagger all of this. If you guys are thinking, good golly, how did they get all of this through their Medicaid waiver? Every year I try to think of some big project. Our Medicaid waiver, we're only able to use for her first 18 years. And then after that, it goes away. And so essentially and we didn't get it until she was 3. And so I am trying to find all the equipment that I can think of for the next, 10 years that we might use. And so this chair has been phenomenal to get us through where Stella could actually still be rear facing. We have it forward facing because we just switched her over when Sarah was over. But up until then, I mean, she's 7.5, and I was able to keep her in rear facing using this particular chair. And so you can see as I'm, putting her in it, the whole chair comes out of my van. And this is something that you put in after market. And we have a town and country van. So the actual bucket seat is down in the stow and go. And then this just was put on top of it. And so when we want to sell it, we can either sell just the adaptive chair and the van separately or together. But it has been an absolute lifesaver. And then our next step, because Stella is getting much bigger and longer, is that we're looking at a wheelchair accessible van that will have the wheelchair ramp, where we would just keep her in her wheelchair and go straight into the van. All right. And so Sarah, can you think of anything else that we maybe talked about going over and we didn't go over, and we'll open it up for questions here in a few minutes too?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything. Yeah.
And I know we went kind of quickly, but I have all these videos. So if you guys have any questions or you want to watch the videos again in slow-mo or whatever, I can share those, but we'll also have this recorded too, where you can go back and watch. Well, thank you, Sarah. And so now we'll bring up Michelle, because one thing I really wanted to hit on during this presentation was not just the lifting and moving of our children and how we're taking care of ourselves, but also as we're thinking about that surviving to thriving theme. I know that physical activity is something that I really struggle with. And most of the time it's because I feel like I don't have time, which we really don't. But when you think about what are some small things that we can do that gets us more active and that we're keeping our body healthy and strong. So Michelle, do you want to kind of take over and tell us your perspective?
Sure, I'll take over. And I think what I'll have you do, Casey, is you can just stay on this screen and
Okay.
I'll give a few-minute overview, and then everyone knows where to reach me. You can reach me on Facebook. I do book club on Monday nights. And if you have any questions specifically for me, feel free to reach out to me there. That was an amazing presentation, Sarah and Casey, on the correct and proper way to lift and transfer our kids. In my perspective, as an outpatient physical therapist, is that we all understand that sometimes when you're lifting your kids and doing things like that, you cannot do it the proper way every time. And that's okay. As long as you're trying to do it the correct way each time, that is the best, because you want to save. I don't want to say when you make mistakes, but when you make a mistake because you have to out of safety for your kid, you want it to be when you're lifting your kid, not when you're doing exercise. So I have a few handouts that Casey will distribute that show different types of exercise. And when you're doing the exercise, that's when you really want to make sure that your knees are behind your toes when you're squatting, when you're lunging, and just different things like that. So I wanted to save time for questions. So what questions do people have about different exercise, different lifting, different things like that?
And I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat. I think the biggest thing that if I were thinking of this, or what are some things that I can do from home, because I have a really hard time, even if the gym's 15 minutes away, in my mind, that's 15 minutes of wasted time driving to the gym and 15 minutes driving home. And so what are, when you're thinking about this, are there things that we can do from home that, with just normal objects, that we don't have to go out and buy a whole new gym?
Definitely. Oh my gosh, no, you don't have to go out and buy any equipment. Going for a walk counts. Going for a walk for 3 minutes counts. Walking up and down your stairs 3 times counts. What I like to tell my patients is start low. So I haven't ran since before Henry. I would not go out and run a 5K right now. But walking counts. Walking is better than nothing. Walking for 5 minutes is better than sitting on the couch and streaming Netflix for 5 minutes. But if you need to do that night, because that's where you're at, do it.
So yeah, I like that thought of, just because I'm doing something slow and not for very long doesn't mean that it's not important and it isn't helpful.
Exactly. And the same goes with strength training. While yes, the CDC recommends, and I recommend to my patients, strengthening all major muscle groups 2 to 3 times a week. In reality, if you're able to do a plank for 15 seconds twice in a day, heck, if you do it once in a day, that's better than nothing. And it's a building block to start somewhere and build up.
Definitely. So, we talked a little bit about the muscle straining or strengthening. I'll go ahead and just until we have some different questions pop up. I'll kind of go through some of the ideas that you have on our presentation as well.
Exactly. No, that sounds great. So the bridge exercise, you can do that in your bed if it's more comfortable. You can do it laying down on your floor. These 3 exercises are some of my favorite strengthening because they're going to hit more than just your back and your abdomen. When you're weight bearing on your hands in that bird dog position, you're also able to strengthen your chest, your back, your shoulders, and same goes for the plank. You're strengthening your shoulders because you're weight bearing through it as you're doing it. So you effectively work a lot of your major muscle groups just with doing like a 15 or 30-second plank.
I'll never forget, I was doing some kind of like Pinterest workout and it was like, do a plank for 1 minute. And that was the longest minute of my life. Like I was shaking and I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I really like the thought of starting out with like 15 seconds.
Yeah, and you can start out with like a plank in a modified push-up position on your kitchen counter. You can do it on your knees. You can do it on your forearms. You can do it on your palms. And it's something where think of how many visits we've taken our kids to for physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. How many visits have you done for yourself?
Mhm.
And it's something where a physical therapist one-on-one could show you in a session or two different strengthening exercises, different stretching exercises that are targeted for you. Because something to keep in mind too when we're lifting our kids is we all have history of previous injuries and things like that too. For example, I injured my hip back in middle school. I don't have the range of motion in that one hip that I do on the other side. So when I lunge or half kneel, I always do it with my other leg in front. There's different like tips and tricks too that a therapist could show you in a one-on-one session. And while you have your child's physical therapist, I'd pick their brain too.
Exactly. Great. And so here's a couple more. We have squatting and heel raises. These are all things that we could do from home for sure.
Exactly. And if you need to hold on for balance while you're doing your lunge, that's perfect. If you need to modify the depth of your squat, that's fine too.
Great points. All right. And here's something that I was looking at. I'm like, gosh, I could even just do that in the kitchen.
Exactly. Yep. Just like a simple wall push up, or you can put your hands on the countertop as well. That's a nice way so you don't leave handprints on your walls. I don't care handprints on my walls, but some of my patients do.
Good. Oh yeah. Gail commented, she's like, wall push-up, great idea. I know some of these are so simple. And I was like, why didn't I think about this? And even if I'm just like heating up Stella's meal in the microwave for 30 seconds, like I could do a couple of these.
Right. And I feel it's because we get stuck in a mindset of if we're going to do something, we have to do it 100% all out, kind of circling back to that therapy perspective. When you're first diagnosed, we're all in 100% all out. You can do some things just a little bit too. You can just do a little bit of exercise and a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, I love that idea. And so tell us a little bit about stretching. So what are some stretches we could do?
Yeah. So when I think about stretching, I like to think about when you do the stretch and what time you do the stretch. So I always like to tell my patients, everyone watches the Summer Olympics. Everyone sees the sprinters down in the starting blocks. Oh, sorry, that's Henry's medicine alarm.
Oh.
Everyone sees the sprinters down in the starting blocks. No one's sitting down on the ground stretching out their hamstrings, right? They're doing high knees, they're doing butt kicks, they're stretching actively. So if you're going to do a static stretch, which is simply a stretch where you're holding it for a long period of time, do it at the end of your physical activity, not before. If you want to warm up your shoulders before you do a lift, think about doing some arm circles or arm swings, something more active and more dynamic. And as always, you want to do it in your comfortable range of motion. Stretching should never be painful.
I like that. I wouldn't have actually thought about that. So doing the dynamic stretches, then your exercise, then your cool down, and then static stretches. Or if you're just able to plug in the dynamic stretches and then later do some exercise. But yeah, I like that idea.
Exactly. Like I said, it's all about breaking it up into manageable chunks.
So these dynamic stretches, kind of give us some ideas of what that looks like.
Yeah, so I found a really great handout online from Special Olympics. So those would be things like walking with high knees, walking, bringing your heels towards your buttocks, walking on your tiptoes, walking on your heels. So it's a way where you're stretching your leg muscles, but you're not sitting down on the ground and holding the stretch for 30 seconds. And this would be something to do like if you were going to do a cardio exercise and you had a good 20-minute chunk of time set aside, I'd recommend walking for 5 minutes, warming up, doing some dynamic stretches, then doing your workout, whether it be running, walking at a faster pace, whatever your workout is.
Cool. All right. I'm going to keep going through here. Some different static. So these are more static stretches.
Yeah, and that's what most of us, I think of when we think of stretching, or the stretches where you're sitting or standing in one spot, holding it for an extended period of time. Usually around 30 to 60 seconds is the sweet spot. If you have time on your hands, you can get benefits for stretching up to 2 minutes, but the benefit kind of levels off around 30 seconds. So I don't know about you guys, but 30 seconds is plenty long enough for me. And I have a lot of other things I need to get done in that last minute and a half.
Exactly, right? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I know that we are over time, but just a few minutes here, but just open it up for any type of questions that you guys might have. I know that Shelly did send out the handouts in email form, but I will also make it a point to go ahead and get those files uploaded to our family support group on Facebook as well. That way we can easily assess or access those. But I'm really excited. I printed them out, and maybe we can all kind of post when we're doing them, or, kind of hold some accountability and say, hey, look what I'm doing. You know what we should do? We should start taking some selfies of like us, a book club workout. That's a great idea, actually. If we're already there on Monday nights, maybe we should start doing some heel raises and stuff. But yeah, we should like start taking selfies of us doing exercises as we're multitasking. Oh, funny. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any major questions pop up here, but like you said, Michelle, everybody knows how to get a hold of you. And so we could pick your brain at a different time. But Sarah, thank you so much for being here, but also all your time, taking videos and pictures with Stella and I. And Michelle, thank you so much. I know you had to rearrange your day to be here, and I just really, really appreciate both of you.
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you for letting me be a part of it too. It's been great. So
Yeah,
all right. Well, and just to round us out here, just wanted to again thank Neurocrine and Praxis for giving us a sponsorship. So that way we are able to provide these educational services. And then also, just as a reminder, our very last Meaningful Change Series event will be next Wednesday, again from 12 to 1. And we're going to talk with a total of 5 SCNAA moms, and we will have a TSA Cares representative to talk about traveling with our 8A kids. So I'm really excited about getting together and talking about all the fun things that we can do with our families. So until next week, we will see you then. Bye, guys.